Subscribe now for daily HFY sci-fi stories. You won't want to miss what comes next.
The pressure was a constant presence, a weight that settled in Elara's bones like a second atmosphere. Here, in the crushing core of the gas giant Pyralis, the ancient Sylvi had built their habitats, not of steel or stone, but of living crystal that hummed with a low, resonant frequency. Elara was the latest in a long line of human librarians, tasked with preserving the knowledge of the Sylvi, a species that had ascended to enlightenment centuries ago. Their history was a tapestry of shedding, of casting off their hardened exoskeletons as they reached new states of being. The softest, most vulnerable Sylvi were revered as the wisest, their translucent forms glowing with an inner light. Elara's own habitat was a cavern of floating data crystals, each one a repository of Sylvi philosophy, art, and science. She moved through them with reverence, her fingers tracing the etched surfaces, feeling the faint vibrations of the stored information. She was an outsider, a fleshy anomaly in a world of crystalline perfection, but the Sylvi had welcomed her, fascinated by her capacity for contradiction, her ability to be both fierce and gentle, logical and irrational. They saw in her a potential they had long since shed, a raw, untamed spark that mirrored their own distant past. The tension began with a misunderstanding, as so many great conflicts do. A Sylvi initiate, Kalen, was undergoing his final shedding, a ritual that would leave him in his most vulnerable, enlightened form. As the last of his chitinous plates fell away, he floated into the central chamber, his form now a soft, pulsating orb of light. But in his ecstasy, he brushed against a data crystal containing a forbidden text, a chronicle of a long-forgotten Sylvi war. The crystal resonated violently, projecting images of ancient battles, of hardened exoskeletons clashing in the void. Kalen recoiled, his light dimming, his mind reeling from the sudden influx of violence. He misinterpreted the projection not as a record of the past, but as a threat, a premonition of an attack. His distress rippled through the crystalline network, and soon, the entire habitat was on alert. The Sylvi warriors, those who had yet to shed their outermost layers, converged on the chamber, their crystalline forms gleaming with a cold, hard light. They saw the human librarian, Elara, as the source of the corruption, a carrier of the violent memories that had disturbed their initiate. Their leader, Varys, a massive figure whose exoskeleton was etched with the scars of a dozen sheddings, loomed over her, his voice a low, grinding vibration. "You carry the poison of the old ways," he accused. "Your kind brings only conflict." Elara stood her ground, her heart pounding, but her mind clear. She understood their fear, their reverence for peace, but she also knew the truth. The data was not a threat, it was a lesson. "This is not a prophecy," she said, her voice steady despite the oppressive pressure. "It is history. The Sylvi were once like them, hardened by conflict before they learned to shed their armor." She gestured to the floating crystals, her movements deliberate, calm. "I am not the source of the violence. I am the keeper of the memory of it." Varys' exoskeleton plates shifted, a sign of his agitation. "Memory is a burden. We have cast it off to embrace purity." Elara shook her head, a small, defiant smile on her lips. "Purity without memory is ignorance. You cannot know who you are without understanding what you were." Her words hung in the air, challenging their entire philosophy. The warriors tensed, their crystalline forms humming with energy, ready to strike. They saw her defiance as a threat, a refusal to conform to their enlightened ways. But Elara did not flinch. She had spent her life among the Sylvi, learning their language, their customs, and she knew that their greatest strength was also their greatest vulnerability, their inability to comprehend the messy, chaotic reality of existence beyond their perfect crystal world. The standoff escalated as Varys' warriors raised their crystalline arms, energy gathering at their fingertips. The air in the chamber crackled with tension, the very walls vibrating with the threat of violence. Elara knew she had only moments before they struck, and she had to make them understand. She closed her eyes, reaching out with her mind, not to attack, but to connect. She focused on the data crystal that had caused the disturbance, projecting not the images of war, but the story behind them. She showed them the Sylvi ancestors, not as warriors, but as young, terrified beings struggling to survive in a hostile universe. She showed them the first shedding, not as an act of enlightenment, but as an act of desperation, a shedding of their fear to find courage. The warriors froze, their energy dissipating as they were flooded with the raw, unfiltered emotion of the past. They saw the fear in the eyes of their ancient ancestors, the same fear they had thought they had left behind. Varys' exoskeleton plate softened, his form shifting, a sign of his inner turmoil. The projection ended, leaving the chamber in a heavy silence. The warriors looked to their leader, their faith in their own purity shaken. Varys floated toward Elara, his massive form now seeming less imposing, more uncertain. "You show us pain," he said, his voice softer now, less certain. "Why?" Elara met his gaze, her own eyes filled with empathy. "Because pain is part of growth." The Sylvi did not become enlightened by avoiding pain, but by understanding it. You cannot shed your past if you refuse to acknowledge it. She reached out, not to touch him, but to offer a hand, a simple, human gesture of peace. Varys stared at her hand, then at her face, seeing not an enemy, but a teacher. The other warriors watched, their crystalline forms still, their minds reeling from the revelation. They had always seen the past as something to be discarded, a weight to be shed. But Elara showed them that their history was their foundation, the very thing that made their enlightenment possible. Varys' exoskeleton began to crack, not from violence, but from a deeper understanding. The shedding had begun. As Varys shed his outermost plates, his form softened, glowing with a warm, inner light. He looked at Elara, not with suspicion, but with gratitude. "You have given us a gift," he said, his voice now a gentle hum. "The gift of truth." The other warriors followed his lead, their exoskeletons cracking, their forms becoming softer, more luminous. The chamber filled with a soft, golden light as the Sylvi embraced their new state of being, one that included the memory of their past. Elara smiled, watching them, feeling a profound sense of peace. She had not used force, not even words of persuasion, but had simply shown them the truth. The misunderstanding had been resolved, not with conflict, but with understanding. The Sylvi had almost gone to war based on their fear of the past, but in the end, it was the human librarians' defiance of their rigid philosophy that saved them from themselves. They had seen her as a threat, but she had become their greatest teacher, reminding them that enlightenment was not about forgetting, but about remembering. In the days that followed, the Sylvi built a new chamber, one dedicated to the preservation of their complete history, not just their enlightened present. Elara was given the honor of curating it, her role expanding from librarian to keeper of truths. The Sylvi no longer saw her as an anomaly, but as a bridge between their past and their future, a being who embodied the messy, beautiful complexity of existence. Varys, now in his most enlightened form, a soft, glowing orb, often floated beside her as she worked, his presence a constant reminder of the power of understanding. The war that had almost been averted became a legend among the Sylvi, a story told to their young, a lesson in the dangers of forgetting. And Elara, the human librarian, knew that her greatest strength had never been her knowledge, but her refusal to be silenced, her defiance of the idea that any philosophy, no matter how enlightened, could ever be complete without the messy, painful truth of the past. She had saved them not with weapons or grand speeches, but with a whisper, a simple act of showing them who they really were.